Good afternoon, and thank you everyone for attending today's Future of Real Estate event. We're looking forward to a terrific conversation. We're joined by three leaders who are actively building the future of real estate here in Ohio. And I'm excited to dig into this. This is a very hot topic, especially over the past year where people in the middle of this COVID-19 pandemic have thought of, how we're living, how we're working, and where we're doing it at. So real estate being a big component of that. And so thank you so much for attending. To start, I'll do a quick presentation of overview of what we're going to be talking about today. My name is Chris Berry. I am the president of OhioX. We are a statewide technology and innovation partnership. We have a mission of helping build Ohio into a leading tech hub. And so what do? We connect, we promote, and we advocate. And so we're promoting and telling the stories of the Ohio people, companies, and ideas building our future. And today we're going to dig into how that's happening in the real estate realm. About us. So we're a member-based organization, a 501c6 nonprofit, where we have 90 plus members that represented over 70,000 employees in the state of Ohio. One voice to talk about tech and to promote tech here in the state. And here's some of our members, which is diverse from really large businesses, universities, hospital systems, and startups included, all with the passion and interest of helping make Ohio into a leading tech hub. And so today, we are getting into the future of real estate. And so this is part of a year-long series, and we're incredibly grateful for our sponsor, JobsOhio, who has made this possible. And so each month we're looking at a different sector or industry and showcasing how, again, Ohio companies and people are building the future of it. And so we'll have a conversation around that work today. One thing before we start, there's a chat feature. And so as you hear things, if you have questions or comments or thoughts, feel free to throw it in there and join the conversation virtually. And so today we have, as I mentioned, three leaders that we're going to introduce. First is Calvin Cooper. Calvin is the co-founder and CEO of Rhove. It's a real estate, it's a tech startup that's building and working on some incredible solutions around things like home ownership and making it accessible for more Americans. And then we have Chris Sauerzopf, who is the CEO of SafeWire. And then we have Scott Williams, who's the CEO of the Ohio Realtors. And so I'm incredibly excited to hear what each of our three leaders have to say. And Calvin, we'll start with you. If you want to just introduce yourself, tell us a little about you and the work you're doing at Rhove.
Absolutely. First, thank you so much for having us today. And thanks everybody for joining. Again, my name is Calvin Cooper. I'm the co-founder and CEO of Rhove. And we believe that democracy is stronger when everyone has ownership. And that's why we're expanding access and opportunity for everyone to own and invest in real estate. And so we're turning every renter into an owner and making community capital possible, really turning real estate finance on its head. This is a multi-trillion-dollar market that traditionally has left people out. And America is an ownership society, but 40% of Americans don't own a home, and home ownership is getting further out of reach. So we really need to decouple those two things, ownership and taking out a 30-year mortgage and making things more accessible for people. And that's what we do.
Well, thank you, Calvin. Looking forward to digging in more into the work and the big topic that you and the team at Rhove are tackling. So thank you so much for joining us. We'll go next to Chris at SafeWire. Chris, thank you so much for being here, and we'd love to hear about what you all are building and the technology that you're bringing to this conversation today.
Yeah, thanks so much for allowing me to be a part of it, and thank you so much for allowing us to share SafeWire's story and then how exciting and Ohio has been a really great place for me. So I'm excited to be able to tell Ohio's story from a real estate and technology standpoint. So thanks again for having me. SafeWire exists to assure that every real estate transaction is free from wire fraud. So I've been in the real estate space since 2004. I have a real estate title company that I'm an owner of as well. And we've seen in the last 5-6 years that fraud is becoming a more and more larger concern for the real estate space, especially now with COVID and the things that are happening and moving towards digital everything. So we're excited to be able to bring this solution to the market, and we're excited to be doing it here in Ohio.
Well, thank you, Chris. We appreciate you being here and sharing the SafeWire story during our time together. Last but not least is Scott Williams, who's with the Ohio Realtors, the president and CEO, doing work all across the state, and I'm sure a ton of insight as to things like home ownership and also just the competitive marketplace right now, which I've been looking around Columbus where I live, and it is a hot market. So Scott, I'm sure you'll confirm that.
Yeah, thanks again for having us here, Chris. I admit I'm a bit of the odd man out in that I run an association and I'm not an entrepreneur out there doing the technology that the two gentlemen I'm with are today. I took over this role in 2019, charged with, as most execs are, trying to find the footing for an association in 2020, in a modern world, right? Associations struggle to provide a value statement or value principle to their members anymore. You throw COVID on top of that, and now we've been challenged to help lead an industry that admittedly is a bit behind the technology curve. So as the Ohio Realtors, we're looking for more and more ways to engage with technology, try to find ways to bring technology to our members to make the transaction a bit more consumer friendly, safer, like Chris is working on, and just trying to be a partner in the industry as opposed to just being an association out there for education and professionalism.
Well, great. Well, thank you, Scott, for bringing your perspective to today's conversation. We're incredibly grateful and looking forward to hearing more. But to start, and Scott, maybe this is a good place with the statewide perspective you and your team bring to it. As I mentioned very briefly, COVID-19 has caused disruption across everything. But I think at the heart of it, it's caused so many of us to reevaluate places where we live and how we work and just our lives, because there's just so much that's been happening over the past year. So could you just talk a little bit about what the real estate market has been like over the past 12 months or so with all these things happening across the world?
Sure, and I'll admit it's a bit surprising to myself and to my members. Even my long-term members will tell me that the market they're experiencing now is unlike anything they have seen. You mentioned trying to find a home in Columbus. I think there was something like 2,500 homes for sale right now in the Columbus market area. Remember, my local board in Columbus has almost 8,000 members. So as a realtor out there, there's not even an opportunity for everyone to have a listing. It has certainly changed at what people look at. You see a migration out of the cities to some extent. There was actually just a study released by Bank of America as sort of what are buyers looking for now. 86% suddenly are looking for more indoor space, 64% outdoor. I think COVID did two things. It drove us inside to work, and then it also made you a bit buggy and gave you a little bit of cabin fever that you wanted to work on your patio. And then no shock technology, cell service suddenly is becoming an issue. My president this year is in Cleveland in a home that was built in the early 70s. I believe it's made out of lead. We have to get him out of his house every time we do a Zoom meeting because he literally has no cell service in the middle of his neighborhood in his home. So it's definitely changed what buyers are looking for. It's changed the way we conduct business. We were fortunate we were an essential service, but what we learned even as an essential service, parts of our industry weren't ready for a virtual world. We were one of the first states to allow for electronic notarization. But yet, when we passed that legislation 5 or 6 years ago, the need wasn't seen, so it never ramped up. Here we were with a state that allowed something that there really wasn't a provider out there to do for us. I see Chris shaking his head, and this is exactly what we experienced. We had a lot of the things in place that would allow us to operate that way. We just never filled those gaps, waiting for a pandemic to force it. So.
Well, thanks, Scott. And Chris, I also noticed you nodding your head if maybe you want to hop in here where I'm sure some of the SafeWire story has seen increased importance over this past 12 months or so with just the amount of transactions, but then also just this digital world that we're now in.
Yeah, it's a really interesting time because there's so much of like we're looking at right now is flashing back to what happened 12 months ago. So it's like looking at where we were 12 months ago and how all of the unknown and uncertainty that we were walking into. And as Scott mentioned, OAR was great about, we had these things available to use, but we really hadn't tested it at scale. And so there's been a lot of trial by fire, and they were great as far as working with the local governments and the state governments to make sure we could do some of this stuff legally. A lot of the things that were happening with closing loans and being able to transact online digitally, really we had to accelerate adoption of technology in the last 12 months because we didn't really have a choice. And so I think the advantage of that is now looking back, we've had to make changes because of necessity. And so what changes are going to stay with us as we move through? What changes should stay with us as we move through? And how can we become more intentional about how we live our lives and do our business? One of the things we see with any type of disaster, natural disaster, fraud attempts go up. And in this case, we had a global disaster, a global pandemic. So fraud attempts that have gone up, online phishing attempts, for example, have gone up over 250% since COVID. And so that comes with a lot of the digital adoption that we've had to do the last 12 months.
And Calvin, a lot of this, the hot housing market and just where we've been and causing these evaluations of how we're living and working. Rhove, and you guys have been tackling this home ownership challenge of helping Americans buy their first home, which is a huge milestone. And for, I think, a lot of people, part of that American dream. What has it been like? Because it's been fun to watch you and your team build and also create new innovations during this time, but it's also tackling some of these really big challenges. And so how has the past 12 months been like for you and the team at Rhove?
Well, and the nuance there, Rhove is not necessarily helping people buy their first home. We're creating a middle way between renting and home ownership. Renting is so often thought of in relationship to home ownership. It's what you do when you can't afford to buy a home. It's what you do on your way to being a homeowner. But for 18% of millennials now, a number that's doubled over the past 3 to 5 years, 18% of millennials never plan on ever buying a home. And it's not the right choice for many people at every point in their life. And so there's this great write-up in the Atlantic about how there needs to be a third way. And that's what we're creating, a way for everyone to own real estate, and especially real estate in the communities that they live in, without having to be a homeowner and maintaining the flexibility that comes with renting. And so that's what we're creating, that third way. And how COVID has impacted our market. Number one, the number of people who don't plan on buying a home has increased significantly. It's been catastrophic for renters because the price of a starter home has gone through the roof. And so while homeowners have increased their equity value by $1 trillion in the past 12 months, that just pushes home ownership much further out of reach for anybody trying to buy their first home across the income spectrum, but especially for middle income, working class families, and so many of the essential workers that we found were so important to our economy, but continue to be the most forgotten. And so it's been a major challenge. I think nearly 20% of renters are still behind on their rent now. And that's mostly around that working class family. And so it's a challenge. And now more than ever, we need solutions to really bridge that gap and create a third way for people to participate in the wealth created in our communities. Lastly, I'll point out that in the last recession, it was like 7 million people who lost their homes over a multi-year period. So 10 million renters being behind on rent is already much bigger, but we don't think about the renting population and protecting the renting population and helping assist that population the way we do those who are homeowners. And one of the solutions to plug the hole last time around became a problem. We had like a $60 billion wealth transfer from Main Street to Wall Street as investors bought up single family homes. And that helped provide a floor to prices and stabilize the market, but it left so many people behind when the market rebounded. And we've got to make certain that as real estate rebounds or grows, and especially commercial real estate, over the next several years, that the American public isn't left behind. And so COVID has been an event that I think has really shined a light on many of these issues. And so we have an opportunity now to build our economy back in a way that's better for everyone.
Thank you, Calvin. And Scott, I see you on mute, so please.
There was just a quick comment there in the chat I wanted to touch on. It was about commercial real estate. You know, as hot as the residential market has been, commercial has been exactly the opposite. You know, commercial has been hit hard. Vacancy rates for office space is at a high. The only exceptions to that, things that you would think of typically during COVID: warehouse, transportation, and vacant land. Vacant land, especially the office sector, the only place that is bucking the trend is in the outer rings of suburbia. Again, trying to put work closer to home is the only real office space driver you see in commercial right now. And when you look at the trend lines, they could not be more mirrored image. I mean, as residential continues to climb, commercial continues to decline, and that's going to be an issue with vacancies. Apartments, Calvin, to your point though, apartments, multifamily still continues to see some growth there. There is still building occurring there, but building in any trade right now seems to be hampered by availability of workforce as well as materials right now.
Thanks, Scott. And that was, yeah, I had seen the question. So Tim, thank you for putting that in, and a good, as like in Clubhouse, setting the room where if anyone has any questions or comments, please feel free to throw them into the chat, and we'd be happy to try to work them in. But Calvin, you had mentioned in your comments that, you know, this third way of increasing that ramp to ownership. And so maybe that's a good opportunity to talk a little bit about how technology and how innovation and things like fintech, which I know you and your team, I mean, that's what you're doing every single day. But how do some of these technologies, in your view, both with what you're doing and then more broadly, help make that happen, whether it's the model you all are currently building out or other things that you're seeing across the board?
Absolutely. So we're seeing a renaissance of just innovation in finance all across the board. That cuts across many sectors. And there's an intersection of fintech and property now that's happening that is unlocking so many new possibilities. It would have been really difficult to bring a new financial product to the market 5 years ago even. But now there are many banking as a platform solutions that make it very easy to connect with a banking partner and bring a product to market in 3 months with a small team. And so that's what we did. We connected with a solution of Synapse, an Evolved Bank and Trust, and we got to market really quickly. And we were able to experiment very quickly to create new solutions. And so you're seeing this growing market of startups like ours experiment with new rent-to-own models, taking the old rent-to-own option that many people are familiar with, but providing a tech-enabled solution that makes it more efficient and accessible. And then in our neck of the woods, creating new financial products in real estate that make ownership and an investment more accessible without having to buy that single asset that you're in, maybe owning a stake in the whole apartment complex, which would have been horribly inefficient 10 years ago. And the administration costs would have just made it not doable. And so technology is allowing us to experiment and create things that have never been done before. I got a question about how the eviction moratorium has affected our business, if at all. And I'd say it hasn't directly impacted our business, but it has impacted our stakeholders. And what we found during the onset of the pandemic, that a large portion of renters who are our app users withdrew all their funds within a week because the average American doesn't have access to $500 in liquid assets, believe it or not. And we did a look back a few months later. Well, one, we created a mechanism for them to withdraw same day, so they didn't have to wait 7 days for ACH transfer to settle. We wanted people to have access to their cash more quickly. And we did a look back a few months later, and all of those folks were still current on their rent. And so I just believe that we need to find ways to help people be more financially resilient. And we found that when you make that accessible, people participate. And we've seen over the past 12 months how that benefits everybody.
Thank you, Calvin. Chris, you want to hop in?
Yeah, I think as Calvin was pointing out, I think one of the more exciting things that we've seen in the last 12 months is we're seeing for so long, real estate has always been an analog process, right? It's always been a pen and paper type of process. And what you're really seeing is the escalation and the speed for things to become more and more digitized. And so when you think about real estate as a digital asset, and you think about, now we're not there yet, real estate will probably be the thing that takes the longest to get to become a digital asset versus other things. When you think about digital assets, you think of things like cryptocurrency or things like that. Real estate, it's going to be a minute. There's a lot of stuff going on to make that happen, but it's happening. It's happening, and it's speeding up things in non-traditional ways in areas that we wouldn't otherwise have thought of it. And so one of the things that I get really excited about when I look at what Calvin's doing is they're unlocking so much potential equity in homes that would otherwise just be sitting there for 10, 20, 30 years. And they're giving folks the ability to think about things like fractional ownership, or think of a different way of looking at it. And I think that's what technology is going to do. It's going to give us a way to digitize a lot of these processes that would otherwise be analog. And we don't even know where that's going to take us. Technology exists to be leveraged. And so, there's a lot of real estate professionals on this, participating on this call. And I think two things generally happen around these conversations with real estate and technology. It's for real estate agents, they don't quite adopt always the technology that can make their lives easier. It can make their businesses more efficient. It can be leveraged to do more things. And for technologists, they undervalue what it is real estate professionals actually do in a day-to-day transaction. And so it's really a marriage of the two. It's how do we leverage the technology to do more? Consumers overwhelmingly want trusted real estate professionals in their transactions. Like, that's not debatable. What is debatable is, do they want everything else? And so I think it's carving out that, what is everything else? How can we make this experience much more better and impactful for what they're doing, while still providing those services and professional services that they're valuing as well?
Chris is exactly right on that. Peter Flint, who was the co-founder of Trulia, for those of you who can remember when Trulia was still around, just gave an interview the other day and said what this has impacted is it's going to cause the digitization of the process. The research side of it has been digitized forever. Whether you're on Realtor.com, Trulia, or now Zillow, the research end of the real estate transaction is digitized and is there. The transaction itself is not, and that's what this is going to force. Consumers have complained for years. The difficulty of the transaction, the sharing of the documents, the closing process itself, all of those things are going to be done in a different way going forward. And Peter's quote was, people ask when we're going back to normal. In his mind, we are never going back to normal. We will never go back to where we were 12 or 16 months from now in terms of a real estate transaction, and technology is going to drive that.
Yeah. The biggest problem we have as a traditional real estate industry is data segmentation. It's just like Scott talked about, one platform to another platform to another platform. All that information is just getting lost in the wind, and it's not connected in a way that's streamlined and efficient. And the folks who are doing those efficiencies, the new companies coming into the spaces like the Open Doors, for example, who can build one continuous platform from search all the way to funding, they're going to have a massive advantage on the rest of the traditional real estate space unless we solve that problem. That's also the reason we're having this real estate wire fraud problem, is because of our data segmentation.
Thank you, Chris. And a good segue into some questions that have been coming up in the chat. So thank you to everyone who submitted. This is kind of a combination between something Joey submitted and something Morgan submitted. But, and Scott, you were kind of talking about the shift, and Calvin, some statistics around what people are looking for. What do the three of you think of, of what the next 5 or 10 years is going to look like as people are leaving. We hear these stories about coastal hubs losing population, states like Ohio, cities like Columbus and Cleveland, Cincinnati, and others picking up population because, again, they want yards, they want more house for bang for their buck, a better work-life balance. And so, Scott, we can start with you. Of what do you see trending? Does that continue? Is that something that continues to accelerate, or is it once we're all a bit healthier and COVID, hopefully knock on wood, continues to, become something that we dealt with last year and we're getting healthy, that places like New York City kind of come back? So what are you all seeing with trends here in Ohio and then nationally?
That's definitely a trend. You see it. San Francisco and New York are the two largest outbound migrations right now, and it is coming to areas like this, areas in South Carolina, North Carolina region. The biggest challenge is, and Calvin touched on this, is first and foremost, affordability still is an issue for folks here, and just housing stock itself. We have been behind in building new housing in this country for 7 or 8 years. COVID has made that worse. The economy we find ourselves in, the trade situation we find ourselves in, has made that even more of an issue. Folks may want to come here. Us having properties and places for them is going to be our biggest challenge, especially places that they want. The places that they're looking for now to leave New York City or San Francisco need to be available here. And that's the biggest issue we're facing right now. It's just affordability and where are those locations.
Calvin, what about your perspective? And I guess I'll give Rhove a bit of a plug that I know recently you all announced another state you're heading to bring your technology, your platform, and it was Iowa, which I remember kind of as I saw you and John, your co-founder, talking about it and kind of tweeting about it, like what's next? And I did not guess Iowa, but is that kind of part of a trend you're seeing, or was that just like coincidence?
Well, yeah, thanks. And absolutely, we're seeing this trend where people are more comfortable doing business online. And real estate, I think, would have been a slow follow. We were expecting to have boots on the ground as we expanded. And then the pandemic hit and people just come to our website, fill out a form. And it's usually the owner of multifamily real estate and is open to a Zoom call. And then we'll do a deal virtually without ever meeting in person. And so that's how Bettendorf, Iowa happened. And there are incredible innovators in every city who are looking to do more than just be rent collectors. They want to build community. They view this as their craft and they want to do more. And so they reach out to us, and we're excited to be in Bettendorf, and we'll be in a few other places here in short order. But what we're seeing, I think Scott touched on something that is worth diving into. A lot of people don't realize that affordability is an issue in between the coasts. It's so funny because when we were starting Rhove and I was pitching people across the country about our idea, investors are like, that's, but it's so affordable in middle America. And it's like, but we have about the same percentage of folks in Columbus who are rent burdened as they do in San Francisco. So if you graduated college and you have a decent job and you live downtown, you're spending a third of your income on rent too. So it's as people move from these larger markets here, it's just going to continue to drive prices up. We need to build more inventory. And until we start to embrace YIMBY, yes in my backyard mindset, we're going to continue to have challenges. And that takes a shift in policy to really open things up. But I do think that people are going to choose where they go. And so JobsOhio, folks like the Columbus Partnership, the innovators like Chris and entrepreneurs who are making this community a vibrant one that people want to live, work, and play in, all the developers here who built cool projects and buildings, the experience of Columbus will attract people, but people aren't going to move to cities or states that aren't dynamic. And so you're going to continue to see winners and losers. And I think you'll see markets like New York and San Francisco really come back in a big way. And other markets like Columbus really boom over the next 10 years.
Well, thank you. Chris.
Yeah, well, and I think too, it makes sense. Like 20 years ago, if you were going to build a company like Rhove or SafeWire, you had to be on the coasts. You needed the infrastructure. You needed to be in Palo Alto. You needed to have that sort of support and infrastructure. You needed to be in New York or Boston. Now, and really it's been the last 10 years because of the cloud computing boom, like with fiber optics and cloud computing, you can do the same things anywhere. And now that we can all be connected the way we've been connected, it's still, a lot of this becomes about relationships. And so sometimes those relationships can be harder to form if you're not in those ecosystems. But from just a support standpoint, we don't have to be there anymore. And so that opens all of this up too. And I think you're seeing a lot of the folks leaving the coasts are these somewhat folks that find themselves in the middle. They're in the middle where they're making $100,000-$200,000 a year, but that money translates so much better in Columbus, Ohio than it does in Palo Alto or San Francisco. So yeah, it's exciting. I think it's a really good thing for Central Ohio, but it does come with challenges, like Calvin and Scott mentioned. And so we have to be more intentional about what those challenges are.
It's an interesting talk about the challenges, but also another thing that we had flagged prior to this conversation to talk about is consumer preferences and generational shifts. And so, there's these large themes with someone who's not in real estate every day that you hear about over the years, like empty nesters who want to move downtown or want to move to places like Grandview and Columbus, or, a Lakewood and Cleveland, because they can work close by, but also go to coffee shops and restaurants and whatnot. And then you read, stories about young families. They want to move out to the suburbs because there's more space for a growing family. And so, Calvin, we'll start with you. Just, as you look at generational shifts and needs, like, what are you seeing with millennials and Gen Z? Because I know that's probably more of a focus for you and your team. And then what are the opportunities there to meet the needs of some of these younger consumers, especially that might be buying for the first time?
Absolutely. So we touched on a little bit earlier where we've got 18% of millennials who don't plan on ever buying a home, but an even more startling statistic, 50% don't think home ownership is a good investment financially. And our relationship with owning things and consuming things is changing. You don't really need to own music if you've got Spotify. I know all of us are old enough to remember buying CDs or cassette tapes, and you pull out the album cover and you open it up, and there's just something special about owning it, right? But then now I have an Apple account, and I just subscribe, and I have access to all the music in the world. And same with vacation homes. You don't need to own one. You can just Airbnb. Millennials can't afford our first home, so we're not getting two. But I've stayed at many vacation homes. And so we can use these assets without having to take ownership and possession of it. And same with cars. And we can share Ubers and things that people it would have been inconceivable to do what ride sharing like 15 years ago. And so home ownership is next. Chris mentioned that assets are being digitized and ownership is being digitized. We can now prove provenance of a digital asset. People are starting to move collecting things to the digital space. And I think that's going to be a big shift for Gen Z, especially, but many millennials are really into that. And so I think what we're going to see over the next 10 years is there are going to be more and more people who are not just thinking of renting in relation to home owning as if it's some second class, second rate experience. We're going to see premium, first tier, better than home ownership experiences created, where people choose to be renters and choose to own as a renter in new ways.
Thank you, Chris. I see you unmuted.
Yeah, I mean, Calvin's exactly right. I think one of the reasons that younger folks don't necessarily see home ownership as the investment vehicle it was for all of our lifetimes is you look at you look at digital assets, right? In the last 10 years, there's been no better investment than the top digital asset on the planet, which is Bitcoin. There's been no, I mean, it's been a much better asset than real estate. And so when you think about like performing assets and home is a home, still traditionally a phenomenal asset. But if I'm a younger person and I can't even afford to buy a home, then I have to look for other alternatives. And, there's going to be more and more options to do that than home ownership. And so I think that, we have to recognize that as a different sort of challenge. It's a perception challenge as well that we have with folks who can't afford to buy and sell real estate. And so it's very interesting. It really tests our perceptions about how things have been done the last 10, 20, 30, 40 years. And that is also the opportunity. And that's the exciting part of this, is where do we challenge those perceptions that we've had all of our lives in our careers, because this stuff is moving. It's always a question when you're digitizing something, does it move and does it significantly change in the next 22 years or the next 20 years? And we don't know, but it's happening.
And Chris, you mentioned something about perception and how we think about things. I mean, we already don't live in a house for 30 years and live and die there. We already rent for 10 years and then buy a starter home and then buy a home to raise kids in and then become an empty nester and downsize and then move into assisted living, right? And so it's just this dynamic ecosystem is going to better serve people across that whole journey. People will still buy homes.
It will. And Calvin, too, it's also created a logjam, because you talk about how people move along. We see more and more people now holding onto that asset longer. When you talk about those who want to age in place, when I first started here 20 whatever years ago, it was, homes transferred every 5 to 7 years. Now you're well past a decade, pushing to 15 years before people transfer a property. So for a millennial even looking to buy a starter home, if that house isn't coming on the market because someone's in a 30-year fixed at 1.9% and they don't want to think about moving, or they've been able to successfully modify the house to age there and stay there. Again, it goes back to, it hurts the inventory, it hurts the opportunity for the first-time buyer. And again, it's a completely different shift from own a house for 7 years, fix it up, sell it, take that capital and buy your next, right? We've really changed how we transfer or when we transfer our homes.
Well, one area as we're starting to wind up and towards the end of our time together today, we'll start with you, Scott, but if you could just share something that you're seeing in your work that in the technology front, and whether it's on the path to home ownership or it's innovation during the process, just what's some stuff that you've come across lately that has left you excited, where you just can't wait to see how it unfolds, and if you have an audience like you do today, that you'd share it with us.
We have really started to take a hard look for our members into the prop tech, fintech world. It was always coming. COVID has accelerated it. Getting our people in a place where they can have the best tools out there to serve their clients is critical to us. The National Association has had a Second City Ventures for years, and they've brought a lot of new technologies, a lot of new products to bear. We feel that there is space unique to Ohio's market and unique to the things we do here, whether it's something like Chris is doing, working on wire fraud, which is one of our number one issues, whether it's Calvin's folks working on pathways and financial technology to get them in a place where they can buy a fractional ownership, buy a home, buy a multi-unit. It's exciting to know that for years we talked about the Zillows and the publicly traded companies as disruptors. They're not the disruptors. That's not the proper word anymore. They are leading the industry, and we need to find ways as traditional realtors, traditional brokerages, to get out in front of them and provide the same value that consumers are looking for today. And it's through the work of people like Chris and Calvin that's going to help us do that and continue to grow the real estate market here in Ohio.
Thanks, Scott. And Chris, we'll go to you, because something that I'm sure you're in every single day is, well, digitization can be terrific, and it can create convenience, and it can help with speed. It can also, there are downsides, and whether it's fraud or issues like that don't necessarily happen if it's two people that are sitting together signing documents or something like that. How are you and your team tackling that, and what do you think it means for the industry?
Well, what the challenge is that we have somewhat of a legacy industry, and that means that we have this industry has been around a long time. It's done things in a lot of different ways for a long time, and there's a lot of value to that, but there's also a lot of inefficiency in that. And ultimately, the number one thing I'm obsessed with right now is that data segmentation that's happening in the real estate transaction from the very beginning. When you think about I'm a buyer and I get on Zillow and I think about, or Realtor.com or my broker's website, and I think about wanting to start looking for homes. From that very first minute all the way into the money's in their account and their transaction is funded. All of those different inefficiencies that are happening day in and day out. And that is our challenge. That's our number one challenge. And because of that and those inefficiencies and those segmentations of all of that data, it's leaving us vulnerable to things like real estate wire fraud. They're getting us where we're weak. And where we're weak is how we communicate oftentimes through unsecured email, for example. And that's where we've been vulnerable the last 5, 6, 7 years. And unless we get our arms around that, my core concern is that the consumer is going to lose trust and confidence in what we do with their money. And if they lose confidence in what we do as a traditional real estate industry with their funds, then there's no coming back from that. If we lose consumer confidence in what we do as a traditional real estate industry, and I keep using the term traditional, I just mean the folks that are doing it day in and day out, how we leverage technology to improve and make safer and more efficient that traditional real estate space is either what's going to make or break us and how we compete against the new folks coming into the space.
Thank you, Chris. Well, I think now's a good opportunity. We're going to kind of start the end of our program where we'll do some quick round robin questions. The answers don't have to necessarily be quick, but some of them are fun and some of them are kind of future forward looking. So we'll go Chris, Scott, Calvin, and we can repeat that when we go around. But the first one is what is, if you're bringing someone to town, wherever you live, or to Ohio, favorite place in Ohio, where are you taking someone and why?
I love Hocking Hills. So I love Hocking Hills. It's just a great place to escape to. I have some land down in Benton County, and I love it down there to go and unplug and recharge, especially in the last year. So that's one of my top spots.
All right, so Chris stole mine, but I grew up in the southern part of the state at a little tobacco farm for folks that didn't know that tobacco was raised in Ohio. But the Arca Appalachia area down there that the entire Cincinnati Nature Conservancy owns, there's just so many ecosystems down there, trail systems, things to see, vistas, that is a remarkable spot that most folks don't know exist in Ohio.
Great. Thank you, Scott. Calvin?
Short North. You do business on the coast. So many people are like, wow, Ohio, flyover. What's going on there? I'm like, let's go bar hopping in the Short North. There's so much art, culture. It's fun. It's getting less weird these days, but we've got parts of town that are still weird. And so you bring people to Columbus and they have a good time and they can see themselves doing business here. And so, yeah, the Short North.
Well, watch out, Austin. We're Short North in Columbus is keeping it weird. So that's awesome. Chris, we'll go back to you for our next one, but what is a prediction for the future of real estate? And this can be kind of crazy, moonshot, off the wall thing, but what's something that you're seeing or thinking is going to happen? And it can be 1 year, 5 years, 10 years, 50 years, whatever you want.
Well, I think I don't think it's within the next 10 years, but I think somewhere in the next 10 to 30 years, we are going to be transacting real estate as a digital asset, just like you would a currency. And we're likely going to be able to do it across the globe using things like Bitcoin, where you're going to be able to buy a home, a second, a third, a 10th ownership in a beachfront place in Costa Rica using Bitcoin, and vice versa. Now, the thing that's going to drag that and slow that down are going to be obviously governmental regulations and things like that. But the technology and the digitizing all of those things is going to happen.
Great. Thanks, Chris. Scott?
I think for us, you're going to see a bigger role that virtual technologies play, even artificial intelligence. There's a company down in Tennessee that has created a robot that follows folks around during open houses, because what they have found is that, parents, A, look for somewhere to put their kids while they're looking at a home, but B, folks will talk to this thing more frequently or more openly than they will a real estate agent. The thing is downloaded with the floor plans. It knows everything about the home. But then at the end of it too, they can also provide that feedback to the buyer. I mean, some of the stuff that's going out there, it's a little weird. Elon Musk is taking over with the AI, but I think you're going to see more and more of that virtual work, because again, if you're going to see people migrate, it's not practical to get on a plane in San Francisco to fly to Columbus every other weekend to look at homes. You're going to look for other ways to experience that property where you are.
That's great. Thanks, Scott. Calvin?
Oh yeah, so I got an answer, but I want to mention something because Chris keeps saying it about transacting real estate digitally. We already do that on a quantum ledger database that's cryptographically verifiable. We just don't market it. So we've been transacting a derivative of real estate value for a year now. It's just not like something we announce to the world, because then people get caught on that instead of the actual value of what we're doing. But my prediction, in 30 years, the 30-year mortgage will be dead, and we'll have new innovative ways to think about owning homes. And one thing that I learned recently is that the word mortgage is Old French for death pledge. It sounds so morbid. It's gotta go.
Well, as awesome as it would be to end on death pledge, we still have a few more. I'm going to throw in a final question, just an opportunity for the three of you to just share either final thought from the conversation today that maybe we didn't get to, or if you want an opportunity to share a little bit more about you, your work, how people that are interested in learning more can do so. So Chris, we'll start with you again.
Yeah, I don't want to follow death pledge. Like, I think that's a keeper. To me, one of my core beliefs is that technology exists to be leveraged. And so, one of the things I'm passionate about is building technology that empower people to do more of whatever it is they want in their life. So for some real estate professionals, that means they want more money, or some want more time so they can spend it with their family, or whatever it is. So how do we leverage technology to do more of whatever it is you want, versus be afraid of it or run away from it or not empower your business with it? And so that's where we're going with SafeWire. We're obviously focused on this wire fraud problem, but we're also, how do we create solutions that are empowering, safer, more efficient transactions for real estate professionals and consumers? And that's ultimately how we're going to win or lose this whole experience in the next 5-10 years.
Thank you, Chris. Scott?
I think it's an exciting time for real estate. We talk a lot about challenges and threats out there, but it's not going away. And I think this industry is ready to adapt, embrace these technologies. We look back at some of the places we've been and we laugh about it. But when we went from MLS books, little phone books of property listings, to a digitized system of viewing properties, that was earth-breaking, ground-shattering, whatever the right word is there, not death pledge. But we will continue to exist, and we will continue to find ways. And to Chris's point, we have to find those technologies that allow us to do more of what we want, but also continue to serve those who want that personal touch. There are some people who, listen, buying your first home is frightening, whether it's a fractional ownership in an apartment or whether it's a starter home in Clintonville. Making that jump is frightening. And for some folks, they want the comfort of interacting with a person to help them through that transaction. But there are ways that technology will help that transaction be simpler, safer, and that's what tomorrow's consumers will want for sure.
Thank you, Scott. And Calvin, if you have any French Revolutionary tips or final thoughts for us, now's the perfect time for it.
I just think Scott and Chris mentioned, they hit on this. The real estate industry is ready to move forward. And when I was breaking into it from the venture space, a lot of people told me, oh, the real estate market's so old and sleepy, nobody's going to move quickly. And that is no longer true. There's enough pain on all sides of the market, and there's enough opportunity. And there are some cool people all across the board. You've got Scott at this trade association that you would think would be slow moving. They're embracing technology and pushing the ball. You've got multifamily real estate developers who own 100 to 30,000 unit portfolios, who are innovators, moving the ball forward. Real estate agents that we've interacted with, brokers, just every stakeholder in the industry, banks who call us. And so this market is not asleep anymore. It's very much woke. And the industry is about to change in a way that's going to serve everybody better.
Well, thank you, Calvin, and I think that was a perfect way to end it. So you're 2 for 2 on the ending notes of stuff, but that is a great place to end it. And so, Calvin, Scott, and Chris, thank you so much for taking time and sharing your work, because it is fascinating. Calvin, as you said, we have 3 different people tackling this and building actively what the future looks like in real estate. From different perspectives, and doing it here from Ohio, which is incredible. And that's what we love to hear and tell those stories. And so thank you so much. Also want to thank our sponsor for this and partner, JobsOhio, for making these possible. As I mentioned, this is a year-long series. And so each month it's incredible to hear conversations just like this from a different set of industries and sectors, because there's just so much happening and so many Ohio companies and people and ideas that are building it and building the future. And so thank you to JobsOhio. And then lastly, thank you to everyone who attended. And so tremendous turnout, and we're so appreciative for spending your lunch hour with us today. And so with that, we'll wrap it up, but want to thank again everyone, our panelists, JobsOhio, and also all the attendees. So thank you, everyone. Have a great day, and we'll see you next month. Bye-bye.
Thanks for having us, Chris.